Have you ever actually stopped to calculate how much you consume in just a single day?
Oh, wow.
And I'm not just talking about the calories on your plate. I mean, from the literal second your alarm goes off and you reach for your phone.
Right, the doom scrolling.
Exactly. You are immediately consuming text messages, news headlines, just an endless scroll of social media, maybe podcasts on the commute, the opinions of your coworkers, ads on
Yeah, it's
billboards.
everywhere. Yeah.
And finally, whatever you stream on the couch before you fall asleep, we are by definition consuming
Is
machines.
a staggering amount of input.
Mm.
Honestly, we take in more information in a single afternoon that our ancestors probably consumed in a lifetime.
Yeah.
And every single piece of that consumption, physical, mental, and spiritual is slowly shaping who we are. It's either building us up or, it's quietly tearing us down.
Which is exactly why we are here today. Welcome to this deep dive. If you are listening to this right now, you are stepping into a very specific, very important role. You are a Sunday school teacher and you are prepping for your adult class.
A very crucial job.
Absolutely. Our mission today is to take your upcoming March 8th lesson, the one titled Watching Our Consumption, and transform it into a guided teacher prep session.
Yes.
We've got your source materials right in front of us, covering two absolutely fascinating texts. That's Daniel chapter 1 and 1 Timothy chapter 4.
The goal here is to really help you dig past the surface of these passages. We want to give you that rich historical context, help you anticipate the tricky questions your class is inevitably going to ask, and equip you to lead a truly dynamic discussion.
Right.
Because the main spiritual objective you want to keep front and center for your students is profound. You are helping them recognize the direct, undeniable connection between what they consume and how they honor God with their bodies and their lives.
Okay, so to get your class in the right headspace, we really need to set the scene. I feel like the book of Daniel is one of those texts that suffers from being turned into a cute children's story.
Oh, completely. The flannel graph treatment.
Yes, the flannel graph. We picture Daniel in the lion's den or, Daniel politely eating his vegetables, and we just lose the grit of it. How do you explain the Babylonian reprogramming to an adult class so they actually feel the weight of what's happening?
Well, you have to strip away that Sunday school image right out of the gate.
Yeah,
Emphasize to your class that Daniel and his friends being taken to Babylon, this was not a geographic relocation.
you're right.
It wasn't some ancient study abroad program.
Yeah.
This was a forced assimilation camp. King Nebuchadnezzar was a brutal conqueror, obviously, but he was also a brilliant psychological strategist.
He knew exactly what he was doing.
He did. The Babylonian Empire sustained its power by taking the absolute brightest, wealthiest, and most educated youth from the nations they conquered, dragging them back to the capital, and fundamentally reprogramming them.
So the strategy is essentially if you take the future leaders of a conquered nation and turn them into Babylonians, you eliminate the threat of rebellion.
Precisely. If the best and brightest of Judah are suddenly eating Babylonian delicacies, speaking the Chaldean language, practicing Babylonian customs, and working directly for the king.
They have zero incentive to start a costly uprising.
Exactly. Nebuchadnezzar wanted them completely invested in Babylon's well-being, and to achieve this, the Babylonians attacked their identity from every possible angle. They stripped them of their Hebrew names,
Names that honored Yahweh.
right, and gave them new names honoring Babylonian pagan gods. They gave them a completely new education, steeped in Babylonian magic and astrology. And, crucially for your lesson, they assigned them a daily portion of food and wine straight from the king's table.
Now, if Daniel's battleground was the royal dining table in Babylon, the battleground in our second text is incredibly different, even if the core issue is exactly the same.
Yeah, let's fast forward about 5 centuries.
Right, to the New Testament. We are looking at 1 Timothy. Paul is writing to his young protege, Timothy, who is pastoring in the city of Ephesus. And the pressure to assimilate here isn't coming from a conquering king, it's coming from the culture and creeping right into the church itself.
Ephesus was a massive, wealthy hub of commerce and pagan worship, most notably the Temple of Artemis. It was a melting pot of ideas. And Paul warns Timothy that the church is being threatened by false teachings, or what he calls godless myths and old wives' tales.
Which sounds so dismissive.
It does. But to give your class some context, these weren't just harmless ghost stories. In the early church, they were dealing with proto-Gnostic ideas. This is the philosophy that the physical world, including the human body, was inherently evil and only the spiritual realm mattered.
Ah, okay.
So some of these teachers were forbidding people to marry or demanding they abstain from certain foods, claiming it made them more spiritual. Other myths involve these endless convoluted genealogies that people would just argue over for days.
It sounds like intellectual and spiritual junk food, just empty calories that cause arguments instead of building faith.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it for your students. Write that down. It was a diet of distraction. So when you build the bridge between these two texts for your class, the connection is this: both passages are fundamentally about how to live faithfully as a citizen of God's kingdom while stranded in a misaligned culture.
So in Babylon, the threat was a literal physical diet designed to force assimilation and strip away identity.
Yes.
In Ephesus, it was an intellectual and spiritual diet of false teachings threatening to derail the early church. Both required extreme vigilance regarding what was being consumed.
Exactly. That's the core link.
So let's zoom in on that vigilance in the Daniel passage,
Yeah.
starting with Daniel 1.8 through 14. This is the famous moment where the boundary line is drawn. Daniel politely but firmly tells the chief official that he will not defile himself with the royal food and wine.
The big moment.
Right. Now, I have to admit, whenever I read this, I just assume Daniel was simply keeping strict kosher laws. Like the king was serving pork or shellfish, and Daniel just couldn't eat it under the law of Moses. Is it really just about the menu ingredients?
That is the most common assumption your adult learners are going to make, and you definitely need to correct it. If we look closer at the historical and biblical setting, it's much deeper than just kosher laws.
Okay, how so?
For example, wine was perfectly acceptable under the law of Moses. It was used in Jewish celebrations and worship. Yet Daniel refuses the king's wine too. On the flip side, the vegetables Daniel requests instead could just as easily have been grown on farms that dedicated their harvest to Babylonian agricultural gods.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, flour, grains, and produce were regularly offered to idols in the ancient world. So avoiding pagan influence entirely was virtually impossible.
Okay, so if it wasn't strictly about kosher dietary laws, what was the real why behind his refusal? I mean, why risk your life over a plate of food?
Because that food was a symbol of total dependence and ownership. Eating from the king's table meant you relied on the king for your sustenance, your health, your future. It was a covenant of loyalty.
Wow.
Daniel realized that they had already taken his home, his language, and his name. The royal food was the final step in absolute assimilation.
Yeah.
By drawing a line in the sand and refusing the rich food, Daniel was maintaining a boundary.
He was taking a stand.
He was saying, I will serve in this palace, but my ultimate provision comes from God alone. Furthermore, choosing the humble diet was an incredible act of solidarity with the poor, conquered people of Judah who were starving back home or suffering in exile. It was a tangible daily reminder that he was still an Israelite.
And we really can't understate the danger here. When you read verse 10, the chief official's reaction is pure panic. He essentially tells Daniel, if you look worse than the other guys, the king will literally have my head.
Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar was notoriously volatile.
To put it mildly, he had a habit of throwing people into fiery furnaces or cutting them to pieces for minor infractions. The official wasn't being a stubborn bureaucrat. He was terrified for his life.
Which highlights the sheer diplomatic genius of Daniel in verses 11 through 14. He doesn't start a riot. He proposes a very quiet, controlled 10-day test. He says, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink.
Such a smart approach.
And by the way, a great nugget for your class here. The Hebrew root word used for vegetables implies seeds. It means legumes, lentils, grains, and things that grow from seeds. It closely resembles the original diet God gave humans in the Garden of Eden.
But here's where we need to be really careful as teachers not to accidentally preach a modern diet fad, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because verse 15 says that at the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. Let's be honest. 10 days of eating lentils and drinking water does not naturally make you visibly, physically superior to people eating a high-protein, rich diet. You might lose some water weight, but you don't undergo a miraculous physical transformation.
Absolutely not. You must emphasize to your class that this result is undeniable divine intervention. The text explicitly credits God as the active force in this entire narrative.
Right.
God is the one who caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel in the first place, very much like God did for Joseph with the prison warden back in Genesis.
Yeah.
And God is the one who took a meager diet and miraculously used it to make them thrive.
That's a huge point to make.
They didn't succeed in the Babylonian court because they found the ultimate superfood. They succeeded because they were faithful. And God honored that faithfulness by granting them health and eventually extraordinary knowledge.
Before we leave Daniel, there's a fascinating nuance in the lesson materials regarding his diet later in life. In Daniel chapter 10, it mentions him temporarily fasting from meat and wine, which implies that, as an older man, he did consume meat regularly.
Yes.
So it seems the initial rejection of the king's food as a teenager wasn't a lifelong vow of vegetarianism, but a specific boundary needed for that specific moment of testing.
That is a fantastic point to keep in your back pocket for your class.
Yeah.
It proves the action was about identity independence, not a blanket theological ban on meat.
Okay, let's pivot to the spiritual fitness aspect in 1 Timothy 4:7 and 8. Paul uses this intense athletic imagery, telling Timothy to train yourself to be godly. In our current culture, we are completely obsessed with physical wellness. We
Right.
have wearable tech tracking our sleep, macros, heart rate.
Everything is tracked now.
Everything. So when a modern audience reads verse 8, where Paul says physical training is of some value, but godliness has value for all things, how do you, as a teacher, prevent students from taking that as permission to just neglect their bodies entirely?
It's a delicate balance to teach, for sure. You want to make sure your class understands. Paul is not dismissing physical health. He plainly states that physical training does have value. The physical body is a profound gift from God.
Right.
Even Jesus, in the midst of a grueling ministry, pulled his disciples away to rest and eat. Taking care of the vessel God gave you is a form of stewardship. But Paul is drawing a contrast of ultimacy. No matter how meticulously you track your macros, no matter how many green smoothies you drink, the physical body has an expiration date. Physical fitness cannot conquer death.
Right. A six-pack doesn't get you into heaven.
Exactly. Spiritual fitness godliness is the only training that yields dividends both in this present life and for all eternity. The peace, harmony, and resilience that come from spiritual training simply outlast anything the gym can provide.
Now, as an educator, you always need a killer illustration to anchor these abstract concepts. And the source material provides this highly relatable, honestly almost painful little story that you can use in class to make the central idea of watching our consumption stick. It's the wearing white analogy.
Oh, it's brilliant in its simplicity. You can tell your class this story. Imagine a professional who is starting the first week of a highly coveted new job. They are nervous, desperate to make a perfect impression, and they decide to wear their absolute favorite, crisp pair of white trousers.
Setting themselves up for disaster.
Pretty much. On the commute to work, they stop and pick up a breakfast bowl. Let's say it's loaded with egg, salsa, and tomatoes. They sit down at their new desk, and just 10 minutes before they're supposed to be introduced to the senior leadership team, the lid pops off, and they spill the entire tomato bowl right into their lap.
Oh, that makes my stomach drop just hearing it. I actually did something similar once, spilled a dark roast coffee all over a white button-down right before presenting to a client. You just want the floor to swallow you whole.
It is the worst feeling.
So how do we apply that visceral feeling to the lesson?
You ask your class to think about how they act when they're wearing bright white clothing. When you wear white, you are hyper-conscious of everything you consume. You are suddenly aware of how you hold your coffee cup, where you choose to sit down, what you order for lunch. You alter your behavior because you do not want to stain what you are wearing.
That makes perfect sense.
Now, apply that to Daniel. Daniel knew that he was, metaphorically, clothed in the fear of the Lord. He knew he was set apart as God's representative in a dark place. Because of that, he was incredibly conscious of what he consumed physically, mentally, culturally, so he wouldn't stain his identity.
That is such a powerful image. You can challenge the room right then and there. Do we treat our daily consumption with that same hyper-awareness? Or are we walking around spiritually wearing white while carelessly devouring the cultural equivalent of a tomato bowl, just hoping it doesn't leave a mark?
They won't forget that analogy. So let's talk about the practical mechanics of your class. How do you structure this 45-minute or hour-long session to get maximum engagement from adults who might be, let's face it, a little sleepy on a Sunday morning?
Let's start with the hook, the into the lesson phase. The materials suggest starting with a simple whiteboard exercise. Write healthy on one side of the board and unhealthy on the other. As people filter in, just ask them to shout out foods for each category and write them down.
Simple enough.
Once everyone is seated, ask the obvious question. What are the physical ramifications if you only ever eat from the unhealthy list? You'll get answers about lethargy, disease, weight gain.
It's a really easy icebreaker. But the real magic happens in the pivot. After they agree on the physical consequences of a bad diet, you broaden the definition of the word consumption. Ask them, besides food, what else do humans consume on a daily basis?
Media, news.
Yes. You want to guide them toward media consumption, financial consumption, the opinions of others, social media algorithms. This takes the lesson from a health class and elevates it into a spiritual diagnostic. It sets the stage perfectly to dive into the biblical texts.
Once they are primed, you move into the Word. We have pulled 3 really strong discussion questions from the sources that you can throw to the class, along with some guidance on how to facilitate their answers.
Question number 1 is about context. What were the cultural and social pressures Daniel faced, and where do we see modern-day parallels?
The teaching guidance here is to steer your adult learners away from surface-level answers. Get them thinking about modern corporate culture, societal expectations, or even political pressures. Where are they personally being pressured to assimilate against their Christian convictions just to get along, keep the peace, or advance in their careers? Where is their Babylon?
Question number 2 is more philosophical. Do you think Daniel and his friends knew for certain that God would reward their decision before they actually made it?
Ooh, this one is going to generate some debate. Your job as the teacher is to help them realize that faithfulness does not always guarantee a visible, tidy 10-day reward. Sometimes, drawing a boundary line makes your life significantly harder in the short term.
Very true.
You might lose the promotion, you might lose the friend group. Daniel took a massive risk not knowing the outcome. True faithfulness is about obedience to God, regardless of whether you get a glowing complexion at the end of the week.
And question number 3 brings us into 1 Timothy. Based on Paul's athletic analogy, what are specific practical ways a Christian can actually train for godliness?
You can head back to the whiteboard for this and brainstorm a list of spiritual exercises. They will likely shout out the classics like prayer, Bible study, fasting, serving the poor. But here's where you can share a really compelling anecdote from the lesson commentary that beautifully ties the physical and spiritual together. It's the story of the 28-day metabolic diet.
The author of the lesson notes shares a personal experience of doing a strict 28-day program where they cut out all processed foods, sugars, and junk, eating only nutrient-dense whole foods. Obviously, the physical result was increased energy, better sleep, mental clarity.
Sure.
But what the author highlights is the profound spiritual side effect. Because they suddenly had all this physical vitality and mental sharpness, they found they had a much greater capacity to focus during prayer. They had the stamina to wake up early and read the Bible without falling asleep.
That's a great connection.
It is a perfect, real-world example of how stewarding your physical consumption directly enabled them to increase their spiritual consumption.
It proves they aren't isolated buckets. Taking care of the physical vessel improved the spiritual engine. Which brings us perfectly to the final phase of your class into life, the practical application. You do not want your students walking out the door with just a head full of ancient Babylonian history. They need a plan for Monday morning.
Here is a highly effective activity to close the session. Hand out an index card to every student. Ask them to quietly write down a rough, hour-by-hour inventory of a typical weekday, from the moment they wake up to the moment they sleep. Then ask them to look at that list and circle the habits, inputs, or activities that actively improve their physical or spiritual health.
It's essentially an audit of their time and attention. I imagine a lot of people are going to look at those cards and realize there are huge blocks of time dedicated to mindless or even toxic consumption.
It can be a very confronting exercise. Have them pair up with the person next to them and discuss just one single adjustment they need to make in the upcoming week so that their daily inventory actually honors God. Maybe it's replacing 30 minutes of doom scrolling with reading a devotional.
Or changing the podcast they listen to on the way to work.
Exactly. It moves the theology out of the clouds and grounds it in Tuesday afternoon reality.
As you wrap up the class, you'll want a strong summarizing thought to tie it all together. You can adapt this core takeaway for your group. Honoring God requires us to be fiercely mindful of all our consumption, because our physical bodies, our minds, and our spiritual lives are deeply intertwined.
Beautifully said.
Just like Daniel in Babylon or Timothy in Ephesus, we can use our daily habits to resist the overwhelming current of the culture and maintain a vital, living connection to our Creator.
And as you prepare your notes and get ready to stand up in front of your class, we want to offer you some genuine encouragement. Teaching adults about their consumption habits, their media diets, and their lifestyle choices is not easy. It steps on toes. It requires vulnerability.
It really does.
But by facilitating this exact lesson, you are equipping your students with desperately needed spiritual resilience. You are giving them the tools to not just survive, but to actually thrive as exiles in a highly complex world.
Leave your students with this one concise, memorable phrase as they pack up their Bibles and walk out the door. Honor God by honoring your body.
And finally, a provocative thought, just for you, the teacher, to mull over as you finalize your lesson prep tonight. If your own daily calendar, your internet browser history, and your grocery receipt were audited by a stranger today, what story would they tell?
Oh, wow.
Would they look like the intentional lifestyle of an exile resisting assimilation, or would they look like the records of someone who is completely bought into Babylon?